Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for coming. I thought there was some chance that nobody would show up for the last session.
There was not.
And welcome
all
to
the merit we're accumulating.
Oh, that's right. And before we launch into tonight's discussion, I did want to mention for anybody who was intrigued by the discussion of the accumulation of merit we had in last week's class. I asked a question Sunday morning during the Q&A while Lama Michael was teaching about the accumulation of merit, and he taught on that for like half an hour, almost 40 minutes, and it was spectacular. Really? So if you're at all interested in that, it's worth going and finding the stream in the archive and listening to it. It was really something. So, what did you learn about your obstacles this week? Yeah.
I guess I really felt like some of my obstacles were just really hard and fast, and like there wasn't any way for them to move. Mm-hmm. And then just like little things would happen, and all of a sudden like it would, like the whole time frame of when I thought that obstacle would move would just like suddenly like change, you know, from years to like, okay, a couple weeks, maybe that will be gone, you know. It will come back. I mean, just as far as like one of my things is like, you know, not having enough time to practice because of childcare things, and then anyways, whatever. But yeah, it's just kind of fun to see how you can make the obstacle this hard thing that you know what the thing is, but maybe you're not looking for, like you kind of think of it's a hard thing, and then you're not exploring the possibilities of it. Mm-hmm. A lot of times.
It seems so fixed.
It seems so fixed that you don't bother to look at it. You're like, okay, this is my obstacle. I know how long it's going to take, and then, you know, maybe when that gets done, then I'll get to practice, you know, or, you know, start, you know, have something, and you're like, oh, I could look at the obstacle a little bit more.
Did the looking at it actually lead to the less fixed sensation, or did it happen the other way?
It was kind of like I knew, it just kind of happened the other way. It was kind of like I knew that this was an obstacle, and I kept on putting a lot of like aspirations that when this got removed, then I'd do these other practices, you know, that I just don't have time for right now. Mm-hmm. And then I was just at the bus stop, and somebody said, oh, I'm putting my kid in this like summer program. I was like, oh, do you want to do that? Oh, wow, okay, that's going to be beautiful. Yeah. So it's kind of like, okay, you know, you're just like, okay, yeah. But sometimes, I mean, I didn't really like work at pushing it and trying to find. I was kind of just like, it just happened of its own thing.
Mm-hmm. You don't have to wait till they're 18 and move out of the home.
No, maybe not. No, it was more like I was thinking, okay, you know, in 2 years they'll be going into, you know, preschool or. And it could change again too. It could be like, you know, the first day of, you know, the summer program, they like hate it and they refuse to go, and then like, you know, your idea that, oh, this obstacle like isn't there anymore. Okay, you know, so you have to. I think it's. But it's kind of nice to see that it isn't a hard thing, you know, and that you can, you know, you can shift, and I don't know. But it does seem like having an awareness that it was an obstacle to practice, and having this idea of what I would be doing if it wasn't there, you know, kind of made it would, if that space opened up, then I'd be like, oh, now I can use it for my practice, you know? Yeah.
For me, what happened is that when you, I wasn't here, but I listened, talked about the not judging our practice, that made a big difference in my thinking. Because I think that one of my biggest obstacles is judging the quality of or the results or whatever, you know, even the meaning really of the practice, and that made me start thinking about, oh, well, if I wouldn't be judging it, if I would take it however it comes, for whatever merit it may be, without judging myself for it or judging what the quality of the of the meditation or whatever, is then that would remove a lot of obstacles which are created because of that for me. It's like, oh, I'm gonna be tired, I can't do it, or I'm busy, I can't sit down. And because I think the practice has to be always, this perfect moment.
Yeah.
It's almost guaranteed that it will not be a perfect moment when we die, and we hope that we will be able to reach for our practice then.
Whichever
So-
situation.
Yeah, so engaging our practice when it doesn't feel comfortable, when we don't feel healthy, when we can't do it in the way we want to do it, like all of those things I think are training for us to be able to reach for our practice at that moment when we know we're really going to need it. What else happened this week? Maybe you didn't have any obstacles.
Well, I went out of town with family in California, and I guess I didn't practice one day, and the sad truth of the matter is that I don't really even feel, I note it, but I don't really feel guilty because I have never, I have established the karma to never keep any commitment. And it's such a habit that yeah, so it's I almost take, and it sucks. I wish I could go through a vow ceremony for the daily practice itself, something, because it's hard to get myself to treat something seriously. But I think I think I can fix that, and I think that actually the key to fix it is not beating myself up over it, because a lot of the reaction that I've had in my life has come from trying to be perfect, and now I'm really messy, but it's sort of makes it more easy for me to have a more balanced approach. So I'm not really concerned about it. That was just one off of commitments in general. But we went over that. So.
Yeah, this did not seem like a sad truth to me at all. That you don't feel guilty about it, but that seems actually probably. I mean, it's always this balance between being too tight and too loose, and the judging your practice or feeling guilty, beating yourself up, that can really fall on the too tight side, and that itself can become an obstacle. If I don't do this just right, then everything's going to feel really bad. I don't want to do any of it. I'm just going to ignore the whole thing.
Yeah.
I think sometimes it keeps us from doing what we could do.
Yeah, it's figuring out, what am I avoiding? For me, it may be little, not so much judgment, but I know if I sit down and I pay attention, I'm gonna feel this stuff that's here, and so if I can just name it, is it really helpful to avoid it, or maybe sitting with it would be helpful? And whenever I do that, when I just go and sit with it, it almost always does seem more helpful than if I just ran around all morning and avoided it. And so that's what I'm trying. My two obstacles are getting off rhythm. Something will switch in the morning, and I'll be like, how am I going to tuck that in, or even remember to tuck it in, because now I can't do it at this time that is rhythmical to me. And then also, if I sit down right now, that feeling is going to be there. Whatever it is, whatever I woke up with or whatever, and the urge is to avoid it. Just see that I'm avoiding, and then try and walk into it. That helps, but
Yeah, the language we use in the path, craving and aversion.
Mm-hmm.
we can build a sense of aversion around, like, I don't want to see what's there. I don't want to be in my life right now. But
Yeah, and it could just be like just a scratchy, irritated feeling, right? You know, it's like- it goes back to the earlier question some weeks ago about what's your intention or motivation. It's like, oh, I see how I'm maybe expecting to use my formal practice as a way to feel calm and centered and okay, right? And so then if that's my motivation, then I'm going to avoid getting on the cushion when I know that I'm not going to feel that, at least not initially. So it's trying to uncover all those things, yeah.
that's good work.
One thought I've noticed has been arising for me when I contemplate it. It's something you said, Jeff, maybe a couple weeks ago, where you said you guys were talking about the practice of sending compassion to different beings, and how it's not to kind of magically help them, it's to train ourselves to be compassionate. And I know that when I do it, if I don't think about it very much, there definitely is kind of this old kind of Western habit. It's almost like I feel like there is sort of the mojo, like, well, maybe I will magically help them. You know, it's not just about training myself to be compassionate towards others. And I was thinking about how with our emails, you know, we have all the KCC emails that say, oh, please keep my cousin Bob, you know, and you know, his dog in your prayers, and, you know, their neighbor, and I do it quite a bit, and I realize that when I'm doing it, it's like my old Catholic self, because in Catholic Church we did the same thing. We said, oh, remember cousin Bob and his dog and his neighbor in your prayers. But there was, theoretically, you know, the Abrahamic God who was going to listen and go, well, maybe I should help that guy magically because Joe's praying for him, or a lot of people are praying for him. And it feels to me, I think it's lovely that we do it, don't get me wrong, but it feels to me like, because, you know, some of these people on the KCC emails, I mean, you know, they've never heard of me, I've never heard of them, maybe they've never even been to Oregon, you know, like, they're not gonna know I'm praying for them, I guess, you know, unless maybe some biblical God or Hindu God or somebody like hears my prayers and, you know, magically helps them, which is not happening. So I think about, okay, well, I'm doing this, but then I notice that when I remember to be mindful of it, I'm like, okay, I'm not magically helping these people. I'm training myself to be compassionate. Okay. And then sometimes there are people that do know that I'm keeping them in my prayers, like my mother, you know, whose dog is dying and she's spending way too much money on it, and she says, Joe, please keep, you know, my dog in your prayers, and I say, absolutely, Mom, yes, I will. And then I see that, you know, she's still grasping very tightly onto the causes of her suffering, and again, hopefully I'm training myself to be compassionate, but I notice that I do have attachment and aversion, like the fact that I can't seem to pray enough or say anything wise enough to kind of help her pry loose her grasp upon the cause of her suffering, that I have attachment to that, and that I know feels frustrating to me, like, cool, you know, training myself to be compassionate, and that's great, but I really wish I could, like, have that effect. I know I have attachment to the wish that, like, maybe there would be a result, like maybe somehow there would be magical mojo that would have her go, oh gosh, you're right, you know, I should just be more at peace with it. It's okay, and all, and therefore, you know, the person I'm praying for to actually suffer less. but I kind of feel like I know that sometimes they don't suffer less, and so, you know, that bums me out.
Mhm.
So can we help others with our practice? I think that's one of the first questions that I had when I started to practice. Is it possible to help others?
And did you get an answer from somebody qualified to answer that question?
No, I think I got one of those first answers from Lama Michael that never went anywhere. And maybe I should ask again and again.
What was your question?
Well, it seemed to me that what you were asking is, can we help others with our practice? Can we lessen the sufferings of others with our practice?
It seems like it depends on how we measure it. Like if we measure it as the one-to-one transaction, if I pray for the dog or my mom and then I see the suffering lessen, then there's proof. But like if we're working for lifetimes, then so trying to think with the unbounded view, which
The
I
merits.
can't really do, but aspiring to, then all this practice could potentially affect like beings we don't even know, right? And so
Well,
just holding that.
I don't have a good answer to this either, but I do know that we as Buddhists have at the sort of center of our understanding of the world this idea of being interconnected with each other, and it's why all this stuff happens. You know, karma is a tangled nest, and the reason we do what we do is because we recognize that interrelationship with everybody else. And we see people, so it's a little bit difficult to say when you bound the view, it's a little bit difficult to see how that affects other people. But when you use other examples like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and you see what his life has accomplished, just sort of his being, it seems to hint at possibilities, and not even just because he's a cool guy and we all look at his example and he left Tibet and does this stuff, but actually just being near him, and we can, if we have our subtle feelers on, we can kind of feel the energy of different people. I remember when Pope Francis was the new pope, and how when the previous pope, I forget his name, Pope Benedict came into office, there was this kind of sense, and it seemed like a worldwide sense, that you could feel everybody's karma connected. And then when Pope Francis came, that shifted quite substantially, and then there was this other feeling throughout the world. So their activities matter, in a real way. Like, I'm not a Catholic, I've never been a Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt something when Pope Francis came into his papacy. So I think we don't want to think about it in terms of transactional,
Right.
but it also seems like there's evidence that the connection among beings affects each other. That's all I know. I think this would be a question. I'm sure there's a party line answer. Like, you could look this up in a book and it would say, and I think it would be a completely
So Rinpoche, sixth incarnation of such and such, says.
Or it might even be in a sutra somewhere.
Right,
There'll probably be like there'll be 4 explanations with 3 subpoints in each one.
Mm-hmm. The precise way in which the influence is felt.
But asking somebody like Michael, Lama Michael, or if you have a chance to meet somebody who has practiced a lot, they'll relate to that question in an interesting way. good answer, I think.
For me, a lot of what happens in the world is energy. And so I know that there are studies, as you were in some ways referring to, where even plants over vast distances have been demonstrated to affect one another. And so it seems to me that if I practice and in so doing develop more positive compassion and energy in the world, whether that affects you or not, it still is a benefit. And so the details and the proof, I suppose, doesn't exist for me, but I'm comfortable with the notion, or with the information I have, that there is influence through energy over space. And so the best energy I can put in the pond, the better the world is.
And this is one of those places where it may be more helpful to hold the view than it is to know the answer. Like, what if by doing this I am actually able to create something positive for somebody else? And maybe it doesn't look exactly the way I think it's going to. Like, often when we have a wish for somebody, it's pretty specific. You know, I think they should be doing this. I think they should feel like this, or I want them to feel like this. And it doesn't necessarily unfold that way, but just the idea, holding the idea that I really want this person not to suffer, and I really, wouldn't it be amazing if by sitting here on the cushion and cultivating a sense of their well-being, something positive could come into their life, some change could happen. It's just one of those things that breaks us out of having a small view, a transactional view, a kind of mechanistic, dualistic view, which is really the root of our confusion in the world. So, you don't have to believe it, but it may be helpful to hold the idea and work with it.
I also think at an intuitive level, we just get that there's something there. Like, you come to this center and you see people trying to cultivate awareness and compassion. And it feels like it's a real thing. It's almost tangible. I think about the people who are doing a long retreat right now. They're going to do something like 10,000 hours of practice in the 3 years that they're out there, each. And they're going to come back into the world and they're going to live for years or decades in the world. And something's going to happen. And it just seems impossible, just from a completely materialistic view, to think that that would be the same as if they had spent those last 3 years just living their normal lives. You know, it just doesn't seem possible. So I think sometimes we look for the woo-woo when the reality is actually there's some evidence there. But I don't know how the mechanism works. And I agree that the view is, holding that view is really good.
Yeah, I definitely concur that the cultivating compassion is I actually have no doubt that that's valuable, and I totally agree with you, like your analogy of like the plants, and you know, it's like I feel like if everybody's cultivating compassion, and like if Pope Francis or the Dalai Lama are good examples, and that inspires other Catholics and Buddhists to be compassionate, like actually that isn't woo-woo. To me that actually totally makes sense, like that's, and training myself to be more compassionate, all that stuff is, I think, actually clear. It's more just talking about like obstacles to my own practice. Like I notice that I do wind up having attachment to that specific thing. Like if a friend of mine posts a thing on KCC and says, oh, you know, pray for my cat or my, you know, whatever, and I do, and I want that person, you know, that person to feel better, the cat to live, or, you know, whatever, like, I noticed for myself, I struggled with my attachment to kind of that old notion of kind of the direct transactional. Can I specifically follow that request for prayer practice, or even my own choice that I prioritize for someone to prioritize in, or to specifically think of in my prayer practice, and then my attachment to kind of wanting there to be a specific effect like that. That I struggle. Then I find myself struggling when there's not, and I see that the pain seems to specifically kind of continue. And I have a strong hunch that does have to do also with being brought up in the West, where it is a different perspective, I think, on prayer practice, or keeping so and so in our prayers, when there is maybe the notion that there's a God listening who we can possibly get to make requests to, who might grant them, and so I know a lot of non-Buddhists, I think, get confused by that. Like, you guys are praying for people, and isn't that kind of the same as what Christians and Muslims do and Hindus, so.
I think Buddhists get confused about that too.
Yeah, I've asked more than once over my practice career in a Sunday Q&A, like, what are we really doing here? It's something I've struggled with a lot. Yeah. Yeah, and we get all sorts of evidence that it doesn't work quite that way. I mean, we see things come through all the time about people who are sick, and I know that a lot of people respond to those requests, and everybody doesn't magically rebound and live for decades more. Like, it just doesn't go that way. So
Must
it's
be praying
hard.
for the wrong thing.
What's that?
We must be praying the wrong way.
And it's hard to let go of. I wish that we could actually make it be different in the way that we think it should be.
In the Lojong teachings, there's the prayers, if I remember correctly, is something more like, if I'm meant to get well, let me get well. If I'm meant to die, let me die. It's not praying for a specific outcome. It's more like praying to just open to whatever happens. So it seems different than... Yeah.
We could get in the whole prayer thing. We definitely have prayers that are very specific. Like, we have long life prayers, and who are those going to, and why are we praying for long life? Like, you could get in.
I haven't heard of those ones. Yeah.
Yeah. There's definitely
confusing.
Confusing.
Stuff.
Yeah.
Confusion. Yeah.
Yeah, they are confusing. I often wonder what's going on there too. If you come from a Western tradition, it's easy to just do what Joe does and just like slide into the habit. If you came from a Christian concept,
thing, yeah.
Like, you're sending it up and someone's going to catch it. Do something with it.
I'm not bothered by day-to-day obstacles to my practice, but I'm aware that obstacles to expanding my practice exist because of the nature of the practices and or the commitment to be made to do those. But we mentioned last time something that I can't even say without seeing it on paper. The Vajrasattva meditation, and I looked that up, and it involves visualizing somebody sitting on my head, and it involves my expecting that teacher to take away all my problems, and to me that's certainly reminiscent of praying to Teresa or St. Francis in the same kind of way. And those kinds of things are, for me, an obstacle to expanding my practice because it just doesn't resonate with me, for lack of another word. And there perhaps probably are other practices that I could grow my practice with where those would not be issues, but I'm not aware enough to be able to identify and pursue those.
Yeah, Peter, this week you called the question for us, and then in a follow-up email, like, what are we talking about when we're talking about obstacles? It's another one of those words that we use a lot, and we almost never define it when we use it, and so we probably all have our own sort of sense of what it is. So, and tonight people have articulated a number of different things. Some are practical, time, resistance or lack of connection to the things that you do know how to access, not knowing what else there is that you might access. And then there are more internal obstacles, like resistance to going to the cushion because we feel aversion around what we might find when we get there, or judging our practice, or kind of putting roadblocks in our own way, in our own minds, through the way that we think about our practice and engage our practice. And there's a funny way in which using the word gives us an opportunity to shed light on them and to say, actually, I struggle. I have difficulty. I don't get to the cushion all the time. When I get there, it doesn't always look pretty. It gives us some permission to talk about it. But there is another way. The flip side of that is that it can really solidify our sense of relating to them. Corey pointed to it early on, but when we say this is an obstacle, like the word itself has a kind of weight. It's a stone. And I'm just realizing, listening to the discussion here, I don't know what a different word is that I'd use to talk about it. But everything is impermanent, according to our teachers. And
Including the word obstacle?
including the word obstacle, including anything that we experience as arising as an obstacle. So there are always possibilities. There's always the possibility of change, whether that means needing to take some practical action or making aspirations, putting positive energy behind the wish for something else to come into being. Sorry, that was random riffing.
For me, just you had mentioned in one of the classes about finding something to anchor it onto, and I think that's the thing that I haven't figured out, that anchor. So like the day can slip by,
Right.
and I don't quite know, like, should I anchor it to like my first cup of tea, or like what, something that is going to happen every day, or I don't know what other people use as their anchor. To make sure that the day doesn't slip away.
Yeah, how do other people work with that? How do you remember to practice?
I found it really helpful to set up the altar every day, and then to have the prayer that goes along with it. Before I start my day, I set my altar up, but then the last thing at night, it's like, take it down. It's just like, I'll fix my cup of coffee and then you know, set up my altar. So that's been a real good anchor for me.
I definitely try to always practice at least briefly before I eat. Every single time, even if it's just like, you know, brief. If I'm by myself, then I can take a little longer to do it. And that's like kind of an easy way to remember. And again, it's like, you know, I was already in the habit of that for years and years as a Catholic. So it's like, I remember it. Like, there's a little man in the back of my brain that says, don't forget before you eat. Be spiritual. And so, but now I can practice in the Buddhist sense. And that's helpful.
Yeah, I would agree that just having a space for me and going to that space, so it's sort of like the rut, if I don't get distracted by the smell of coffee or something, and just go to where I light the candle and know my cushion is there and have it all, the setting is helpful. And then the other obstacle or the distraction that I've become aware of more is I do have a little app that I do put it on. That was very helpful suggestion that Linda was on. Said, you just put it on airplane mode so you don't get, because it's on my phone. But the other thing that first comes up on my phone, and because I have this, I love this little meditation timer thing, is that when I look at my phone now, I have these news feeds that come up first before you can do anything. It's like, how can I get those?
Disable that.
No, exactly. It's like, no.
Those settings, yeah.
That BuzzFeed to not come up or whatever, So yeah, it's just been a new awareness of it, of an annoyance. It's like, because it really can set me off track.
Yeah.
And then I have to pull it back in. Anyway. Gotta figure that out.
I meditate in bed right before going to sleep if I haven't gotten it in some other time of the day. I've got like my prayers memorized, and then I meditate, and then I've got my dedications and aspirations or whatever it is memorized. And so sometimes I wake up the next morning, I'm not sure if I got to the dedication part. But I'm like, I'm gonna try.
That's a great habit. It never occurred to me to do that. It's like your one last chance. If nothing else worked out during the day, it's like, why not? I'm just lying there.
Yeah, nobody needs to know.
That's right.
My husband doesn't know I'm not like asleep. Yeah.
Well, we should probably turn our attention a little bit, but is there anything else anybody was really wanting to share before we move?
So we have kind of a different schedule today since it's our last time together, and we won't be coming back.
And we didn't write a fifth immeasurable.
Yeah. We already did 4
We're
measurables.
working on that.
So every session we had a thing that Sally and I were calling nuts and bolts in this section, and we titled this one, "Where do we go from here?" And we thought it might be good to mention kind of some of the things that have come up in the class, some of the things that we've just kind of go over the various things we've already talked about. If you look at the question of how will you carry your practice forward, since this is the last class, and We won't have to report back next week. We just thought it would be possibly useful to remember what we talked about, so I'll run down that list and then maybe I'll send this out in the community when we get back to. So this goes back to the first class through last class. We talked about being honest and realistic about what you can do and when you can do it in your practice. And that, I think, kind of one unintentional theme we had in this class was noticing things. So there's so many of these things that require noticing, and once you notice them, they're so much easier to implement. So being honest and realistic is one of those noticing activities. Finding a physical space for your practice, we talked about. We talked about setting intention and making a commitment that we can keep in our practice. And going forward, you can continue to use commitments if you found them valuable, either because they challenged you or because they helped your practice. We talked about how they do a lot of different things. You can make commitments for different lengths of time, different kinds of commitments, and if they're valuable. I've worked with commitments a lot over the years, and you can do month, year, however you want to do this. Holding the big view, the unbounded view, as Michael called it last time. We called it the big view, but using it as an antidote to falling into thinking about things in a very small space, which is how we live our lives. So we talked about the four immeasurables as a way of thinking big. These questions that, like Joe raised, is my prayer doing any good? Why am I praying? Bigger questions, thinking about how your compassion and your loving kindness and your joy is affecting other people, affecting yourself. That can leaven the practice a lot. As you go along in your practice, it's valuable to, on the one hand, find areas of confidence in the practice that you're doing, because those become kind of the tethers when you come through rough patches. So if you have confidence that what you're doing has value, when inevitably you come to some difficulty that you can't practice or doesn't feel like it's very beneficial, it's a place to place your sort of, it's a toehold up the mountain. And then on the other side of that is using your curiosity. If it feels like you've been in a rut too much and you've been doing the same thing, try another practice. Try alternating your practice. Try doing your practice at a different time, a different length. Going on a retreat. Fiddle with the routine. In terms of the confidence element, we talked a little bit about refuge as one of those classic points of confidence. If you have confidence in the three refuges, that can be a thing that sustains you throughout your practice. We talked about the three wisdoms, which are meditation is the one that we know about, but also using study and contemplation as activities that support your practice and even occupy part of your practice time. It's not a cheat to sit down with the book and read the book. And it certainly is a way of enriching the practice that you are doing, both if you're reading books and then also contemplating in your practice. Rejoicing in every positive aspect of our path. I don't remember that very well. What did we say about that?
Mostly I just kept saying, rejoice, rejoice.
That's clearly not something I do that often, so I can relate to that one.
Yeah, we talked about that in the same week where we talked about immeasurable, empathetic joy, that the joy that's talked about there is really joy in virtue and recognizing whether it's in ourselves or in others every time we see somebody planting a seed that is going to produce a positive result. So to rejoice in that, to take joy in that. So when we see our resistance, it's worth rejoicing in the fact that we caught it, we saw it, we were capable of noticing it. When we go to the shrine room consistently or our altar consistently and engage in our practice, or we remember to practice lying in bed at night, those are things that are worthy of joy. And if we're going to sustain ourselves for years or decades, at some point we have to have a relationship of joy to our practice. It can't always be just discipline and obligation, but we should recognize all the good things that we do and all the good things that other people do and all the fruit of our practice, which may feel small to us, but every moment of catching ourselves and noticing, being able to actually see what's passing through our mind, what our impulses are, that's all really precious.
And related to that, and this is one I do relate to, is learning to laugh at our foibles and like seeing the patterns that we, if you happen to fall in a hole regularly, get familiar with the bottom of it, laugh at yourself when you get down there, and just find humor in the path as you go along, so it doesn't get so heavy. And then the last one was the relating to the accumulation of merit as we do our practice, which is something I aspire to try to do myself because I have not done that so well. So we talked about all those things. We were also, and then Sally and I were talking about going forward, like in the next weeks and months and years of your practice, what's valuable to do that helps sustain your practice kind of in a longer time frame. And one of the most valuable, and we haven't had as many opportunities as we have in the past, is retreat. Going on retreats is incredibly potent way to invigorate and sustain your practice. I'm not sure that it's universal, but it's as close to a universal truth as I know in the practice. It's just really going on retreat and spending a longer period of time than you're able to do in your daily practice. Doing meditation, if it's a kind of retreat where you get to learn a practice, that can also be valuable. But just sequestering yourself for a day or two or longer is a wonderful reset of practice. You'd like to add anything on retreat?
No, I think you're right. Almost everybody, I feel like almost everybody I've ever talked to about meditation practice has some story about going on retreat, whether it's a day, a weekend, a week, and finding just that act of being able to let go of all of the daily routine and to not be responsible for cooking your own meals and answering your emails and taking care of your kids or attending to your spouse, just being able to let yourself drop into your practice.
What are the resources for doing that these days?
Yeah, we unfortunately no longer have our own retreat center for short practices.
Right.
And I think there's not as many organized retreats at KCC. It is possible to do personal retreats a little bit more easily if that's something you've done and feel comfortable doing. There are some resources out there.
Like the
Trappist Abbey.
Yeah, Trappist Abbey.
Lafayette.
Yeah, has anyone gone there?
I did.
Yeah.
I did a 5-day there a couple years ago.
And we also were also part of what the group was in.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have done a week silent retreat. There's this guy that lives up off Skyline. He has a Dharma center there. I'm trying to think of the name. I think it's Ningma.
Huh.
And he has a little cabin.
John Paul?
That sounds right. I think he has like the Dharma group meet in his house. Anyway, so I knew a guy who knew that guy, and so they hooked me up. And so he has this like little cool cabin, and he's like, Dharma practitioners totally welcome. It's free. You can just donate something if you want. So yeah, I don't have the good information. It's you look it up, you'll find it.
Bill and Dora are excellent resources on this kind of thing. They know about everybody who has a cabin that they're willing to loan to people for personal retreats. And they know about most of the centers and other activities that are going on. I actually meant to look at our bulletin board and see if we have, or our brochure, our practice calendar for the year, to see if we have any retreats scheduled for the late summer or the fall. Yeah, we were lucky last year, and Lama Eric Trebelhorn did, what was that, a week? Which was a great retreat and really nice.
So in the immediate future, not so many opportunities, but in the longer distance, that 3 retreat is going to end in a little over
I know
a year.
too, Cloud Mountain still has lots of retreats. I mean,
They do.
they're not
It's
necessarily Kagyu retreats, but I mean, I went to our Tonglen retreat there, and they got my address. I'm on their mailing list for life, which is nice. But they're going strong with various types of Buddhist retreat opportunities if we wanted to take those up.
And if you're feeling a real longing for retreat, it's worth mentioning to the members of the program council so that they know that there's actually demand for something like that. It may be that, we're only in May. There's always a chance that they might be able to slide something into the calendar. I don't want to promise that.
Yeah,
I'm not obligating them
no way
to.
Sally said that.
If I asked, she would do a retreat.
They set that schedule a year in advance, and we have a long retreat going on. We just bought a new urban center.
It's true.
And,
There's a lot of activity.
Khenpo Rinpoche is coming in June, so I'm guessing probably Bill will kill
Time
you.
to build up the marriage.
Send a bunch of people to Bill and say, hey, I want to do a retreat. I don't want to be responsible.
It's true. But I do think it's good for it. I think you're exactly right, and something is not going to magically appear on the calendar for 2017. But I do think it's great. I think it's probably helpful from the program council side to know if people are feeling real longing for some shorter or longer retreats. I don't know what you're longing for, just so they have a sense of what to put on the calendar for next year and what people really feel would be the most supportive to their practice. I'm in so much trouble.
You better vote that Bill's not.
It probably is those.
Another thing that is valuable, and you're going to may not believe me on this one, but volunteering at KCC is actually a really big sport practice. When Sally and I first started coming, we did not have, we were young, we didn't have great practice habits, and our main access point to KCC was doing volunteer work. And it eventually led to both of us getting on the board and being heavily involved. And there is a way that what's that?
No, that's dangerous, right?
Well, there's
Potentially, but not-
yeah,
Right,
I mean,
right.
it can, you can definitely find your, KCC has work for you if you have the time. So that relationship, yeah, it's a never-ending cup, never full cup. But just from your own practice side, I'll say that connecting to your fellow Sangha members, doing something for the Dharma, it's an activity that is full of that merit accumulation that actually feels a little bit more meritorious, whether you clean the building or help somebody haul something off. And just spending time with people who are working on this endeavor. I'm not sure everyone's going to say this. I'm not sure that volunteering is right for everyone, but I think it's quite valuable in supporting your connection to the Dharma. It can be. It's something to try, and there are different ways to do that without making a massive commitment. You don't have to jump on the board or anything. You can do Omze or even just help with these projects that are happening now. They're very, they're one-offs. Getting the new urban center going. When Kempo comes, there's going to be a lot of opportunities to help out with that project. So there are ways to get involved if you're at all interested. I think that, people at KCC will ask volunteers for help from the organizational side because we're a volunteer group and it's helpful. We do need that. But I would say, as a practitioner, I have found more support doing that than just about anything. That's really valuable to me personally. Mm-hmm. And I've not been volunteering as much lately, and I've noticed it in my practice. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, and it's pretty easy to keep our ears out for one-offs. I mean, there's like one-offs that'll come up that'll just say, "Hey, this such and such a day, we need some help with something," and it's not necessarily a full commitment to like a new role that we're doing every week or every month. But it's definitely, I agree with you. It feels great to get to help with something, even just case by case.
Yeah, and you can do things like stream, which you can do and actually be practicing. So there are things to do. So anyway, no pressure, but consider that as a possibility, and not even just with KCC. There's other can be other work, but
it's true. When I got done my board service, I really felt like, okay, now I'm really ready to practice. It felt like I'd cleared some things away, and I remember having a conversation with Eric Trebelhorn where I started to unfold that, and he said, I thought you were going to say it felt like your Nundra, which are supposed to be the preliminary practices that get you ready to do all these other things. And I was like, no, it felt like it felt more like the story of Milarepa, when Milarepa found his teacher Marpa. Marpa had him build a stone tower in a field, and then when he was finished, he said, "Oh no, put it over there." And he spent, I don't know, months, years, building and dismantling towers, and until finally Marpa said, "Okay, you've kind of exhausted that energy. You're ready to hear the teachings." It felt like that for me. Oh, I finally cleared something out of the way. I actually feel ready to really take in the Dharma now.
I hope there's a but there.
A but?
But volunteering is great. I mean.
No, I didn't mean it felt like building stone towers. I meant that it felt like it had this incredible preparatory effect for me.
Okay.
That,
I misunderstood.
It cleared some obstacles out of my way. So.
I don't think I've ever heard that.
Anyway, sorry, that was random.
I never heard that. Another thing you can do is, particularly if you have questions about your practice, is schedule an interview with one of the teachers. And this can be really supportive because practicing on your own in your own little silo, you don't have anybody to give you an alternate view, and teachers are really good for that. So sitting down with somebody and talking to them about questions like some of the ones Peter's shot our way can be really valuable. And I know that Michael still does some. I think Zopa does them. Bill does them. I know. Is Dora doing?
I think she's not been doing.
Who?
Dora.
Oh, no, but one of the one-year retreatants is doing them too.
Oh, cool.
I think. Julie, do I want to say?
Julie Verlocker.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either.
Very nice.
All right.
Yeah, I wanted to be sure it got mentioned.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
So that's an opportunity. And the last thing is seeing different teachers, particularly really inspiring teachers, can be incredibly invigorating for practice. And I would have said that irrespective of the calendar ahead, but Khenpo Rinpoche is coming, and it's probably worth at least checking in this regard. But there are other, Khenpo Rinpoche is the one second from the left, just to the left of His Holiness Karmapa there. Khenpo Rinpoche is, so Kala Rinpoche founded the center. His principal student was Boka Rinpoche, so Kala Rinpoche is on the far right. His principal student was Boka Rinpoche, who was immediately to his, coming this way, left. Boka Rinpoche died in 2004, and his principal student was Khenpo Rinpoche, who is still alive and now overseeing Boka Rinpoche's monastery and is involved in the instruction of the reincarnation of Boka Rinpoche. And he will be coming to Portland in June. Sometimes His Holiness Karmapa travels, people like Mingyur Rinpoche and others travel, and you won't always feel inspired by these teachers, but you may find one who is insanely inspiring. That is the experience some people have had, including myself, with different teachers. And also you'll find sometimes you don't get inspired, and that's actually okay too. We don't get inspired uniformly by everybody. But it can be really valuable. And also kind of help connect us to the longer lineage as it goes back to Asia. I think that is a really nice
Who's the fellow on the far left?
That's Kala Rinpoche Jr.
the
Sorry.
Junior, yeah.
the reincarnated Kala Rinpoche.
The reincarnated Kala Rinpoche. Thank you. I don't think I realized that was a picture of him.
Yeah, so unlike the issue of retreats on this one, if you're interested, there's actually an opportunity coming up very soon to a center near you.
Yeah.
And Khenpo Rinpoche is he's delightful. He has a wonderful sense of humor, and his English has actually gotten quite good.
He is literally one of the most joyful people I've ever encountered.
He looks like it.
Yeah.
He laughs a lot. He's a really wonderful guy to be around.
Yeah. And seeing or interacting with great teachers can really be one of those things that builds a sense of confidence in the path. Because you look at somebody like that and think, okay, how did you get like that? You did these things. You did these practices. You did the things that we're being taught to do. Like, if the end result looks like that in this life, boy, I'd be really happy about that.
Is there a Saturday event coming up that Michael is hosting?
Yeah.
Would you recommend that somebody who hasn't been going to KCC for very long attend that? Or is that something that if you've had some training, it's like I've gotten kind of a message that you should have some training in the 7-point mind meditation. What would you say if I was interested in that, for example?
You should have watched the, I don't know if it's actually on there. He said, when it came out during those long
The 20 minutes of announcements.
He phrased it very interestingly. When you look at it on the website, it does say kind of like, if you're not doing this practice, probably not for you. But he said he put a little space around that.
Yeah.
And I can't remember how he phrased it. But I would ask him or one of the teachers. My guess is if you're inspired and want to go, no one is going to say no.
Yeah,
but they may talk a little bit about what's going to happen and see if it's a good fit.
It's certainly not a firm prerequisite. You must have been working with the aphorisms of the 7-point mind training for a certain amount of time to go. I think it's more of a sense of, if you're not working with this, what he's teaching about may not feel so relevant. For those folks, it's really going to, I think, feel like a little bit of a puzzle piece clicking into place. But yeah, nobody's banned.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'm okay with only having one puzzle piece at a time.
Well, Mama Dripku is going to be here too on
Right.
Wednesday evening. May 24. So he's a Western teacher, but he was like in the first 3-year retreat that Colin Rinpoche put on, or something like that.
Mhm.
First Westerner to attend the 3-year retreat.
Was he on the same one Ken was on?
I think he was.
Yeah, he might have been on the same retreat Ken McLeod was on.
Yeah, yeah.
So I know we're a little late for our break, but I just want to say one more thing, and then we'll take a little break. And then when we come back, we want to ask you some questions about this class for our edification. But I think that really, if I could send you out from this class with one message, it is that we should recognize our extraordinary good fortune in having found KCC. Jeff and I went to the Mahamudra seminar in India in 1999, and as part of the seminar teachings, they had little separate training sessions on the practicalities of how to do the Nindro practices, and there were French-speaking lamas who taught for all the French-speaking students and anybody who had French as a second language, and then Lama Michael was asked to do the sessions for the Americans and anybody who had English as a second language. And Jeff and I met a couple of students from Scandinavia, and we can't remember exactly which country. And, you know, they struck up a conversation with us, and they said, so Lama Michael is your teacher? And you have, and all these people, there were a lot of KCCers who went, like, all these people are from your center, and you have a center in Portland? We're like, oh yeah, we've got meditation on Sunday morning, Q&A, and then again on Sunday night, and Chen raising on Wednesdays. And we're like, our teacher lives in Spain. And we go there once or twice a year, and we have the opportunity to interact with our teacher. And it really struck both of us, like, oh my God, it's like I'm rolling around in a pile of money over here. I'm just extraordinarily wealthy in Dharma resources, and it didn't even occur to me how many people practice the path and practice it in a very earnest way without having any of the supports that we have. Like, I can just wake up on Sunday morning and decide, do I want to go to a Dharma teaching? Do I want to go sit with my community today?
And in the United States, that's rare too.
Even in the United States, that's rare, yeah. And we really do have the 3 jewels, you know. We have teachers we can rely upon, we have the authentic path, we have this community. We really have something that we can take refuge in and that we can rely upon and we can use as a resource to support us in engaging the path. And you should just all know that you're never alone in your practice. You're part of this community. A number of you have said, as the class has been unfolding, how valuable it's been to come together and to hear other people's stories and to have conversation about what works and doesn't work for people. Like, you are surrounded by Dharma brothers and sisters, and now you've gotten, if you didn't know very many people at KCC before, you've at least gotten to know the people in this room. And I hope that you'll view us as your Dharma brother and sister and as a resource, and that you'll be a resource to one another. Because I would not be where I am with my practice if I hadn't had the support of being able to go to friends in the Dharma and say, I'm really stuck here, or I'm really struggling with this. Has that ever happened to you? Or how do you deal with this? How do you remember to engage your practice? How do you deal with balancing your career and your children and your marriage and your practice? We are a resource. We can be a resource to one another. So I hope you you take the opportunity to experience that support for your practice. All right, let's take a little break.
What she said.